The dawn of aerial combat in the First World War introduced a terrifying new dimension to warfare, and with it, a seemingly intractable problem for defenders on the ground and at sea: how to reliably strike a fast-moving target in the vast, three-dimensional expanse of the sky. For decades, the solution remained rooted in a cumbersome and statistically dismal process that was more an art of hopeful estimation than a science of precise destruction. The tragedy at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, would expose the catastrophic inadequacy of this existing technology with brutal, heartbreaking clarity, creating an urgent and desperate need for a revolutionary solution. The fundamental principle of anti-aircraft gunnery in 1941 was a complex ballet of manual labor, mechanical computation, and sheer guesswork, all performed under the extreme duress of diving enemy aircraft and exploding bombs. It was a process governed by unforgiving mathematics. The first step required optical rangefinders, often manned by teams squinting through stereoscopic lenses, to calculate the exact distance to a target moving at 300 miles per hour or more, often through the visual noise of smoke, cloud cover, or the blinding glare of a tropical sun. Simultaneously, height-finding equipment, another mechanical marvel of limited accuracy, had to estimate the aircraft's altitude, a figure that could change violently as a pilot climbed, dove, or weaved. This raw data, range, bearing, and altitude, was then fed into an electromechanical fire control computer, an intricate assembly of gears, cams, and servos that constituted the most advanced technology of its day. This brain would attempt to solve a complex physics problem in real time, calculating the target's future position by estimating its speed and direction, while also accounting for the ballistics of the shell itself, its velocity, the drop due to gravity, and even the Coriolis effect. The output was a firing solution, a specific azimuth and elevation for the guns. Yet the most critical and most fallible step still remained: the time fuse. As the heavy 5-inch shell was manhandled from its hoist, a sailor would dash forward with a specialized wrench. Based on the computed time of flight, he would manually set a delicate, clockwork fuse screwed into the shell's nose. This mechanism was a tiny, spring wound timer. With a twist of the wrench, he would turn the dial to the estimated number of seconds until the shell would, in theory, intersect the aircraft's path. The shell was then loaded into the breech, the gun was fired, and the clockwork began its countdown. Inside the shell, as it soared skyward, the fuse would tick away the seconds until, hopefully, it reached zero at the precise moment it was near enough to the enemy plane to destroy it with shrapnel. The odds of success in this elaborate ritual were vanishingly small. Under ideal training conditions, with cooperative target drones, it took an average of 2,500 rounds fired to destroy a single aircraft. In the chaos of actual combat, with multiple targets executing evasive maneuvers, with smoke obscuring vision, and with the psychological terror of an attack, these odds plummeted to near futility. The mathematical chasm between gunnery technology and aerial performance had been widening for years. In 1918, biplanes chugged along at 90 miles per hour below 15,000 feet. By 1940, modern monoplane fighters and bombers were exceeding 400 miles per hour at altitudes above 30,000 feet. The defensive technology had failed to keep pace. The human cost of this technological failure was etched into the streets of Honolulu on that infamous December morning. As American gun crews aboard the ships in Pearl Harbor fought back with desperate courage, they were hamstrung by their own equipment. The vast majority of the shells they fired, with their manually set time fuses, exploded harmlessly in empty patches of sky, their timers detonating them seconds too early or too late. Some, due to mechanical failure or incorrect setting, never exploded at all. Others, their contact fuses still armed, arced high into the sky, only to fall back to Earth under gravity, becoming unguided, high-explosive projectiles raining down on the civilian communities of Oahu. 9 miles from the harbor, In a city gripped by fear and confusion, these American shells became instruments of tragic, friendly fire carnage. A 55-pound 5-inch shell crashed through the window of a restaurant where the Hiyosaki family was serving breakfast. Father Jitsuo, his sons Jackie and Robert, his daughter Shirley, and his nephew George perished instantly in the blast, along with 7 young men eating at the establishment. In another home, 3-month-old Janet Yumiko Ota became the youngest casualty of the day when an American shell struck, killing her, her mother, and her aunt. When the smoke finally cleared over Pearl Harbor, the grim tally included 68 dead civilians. An investigation would later reveal that 32 of these deaths in Honolulu were caused not by Japanese bombs, but by improperly fused American anti-aircraft shells. This tragedy illustrated the problem with horrifying clarity. The existing technology was not merely inefficient, it was dangerously obsolete. It demanded a sequence of perfect information and perfect execution under conditions where perfection was impossible. The system was a testament to human ingenuity, but it was pushed beyond its breaking point. It required a miracle of prediction that gunners could not provide, and a reliability that clockwork fuses could not guarantee. The failure at Pearl Harbor was a systemic one, a signal that the entire paradigm of anti-aircraft defense needed to be torn down and reinvented. The war could not be won by firing 2,500 shells for every aircraft downed. A new approach was needed, one that moved the burden of precision from the human gunner before the shot to the shell itself after the shot was fired. The solution would not be found in better mechanics, but in the nascent, seemingly magical world of electronics. The stage was set for a revolution. The desperate need born from the flames of Pearl Harbor would now intersect with the brilliant, stubborn minds of American scientists who were about to be tasked with achieving the impossible assignment, conjuring electronics from thunder and steel. While the guns fell silent over Pearl Harbor, the shock waves of the attack reverberated through the scientific corridors of Washington, D.C., galvanizing a project that had, until then, been considered a speculative long shot. The seed for a solution, however, had been planted over a year earlier in the cerebral environment of the Carnegie Institution's Department of Terrestrial Magnetism. Here, the problem was not seen through a gun sight, but through the lens of fundamental physics. The man at the center was Dr. Merle Tuve, a physicist from South Dakota whose pre-war work had been focused on the upper atmosphere. In 1925, alongside Gregory Breit, he had pioneered the use of radio waves to probe the ionosphere, research that inadvertently laid the foundational principles for radar. When the National Defense Research Committee, NDRC, approached him in August of 1940 with a British idea, a proximity fuse for artillery shells, Tuve immediately grasped that the same radio wave principles could hold the key. The British, after preliminary research, had concluded the concept was unworkable for artillery. The forces involved were simply too great. No electronic device could survive being fired from a cannon. But Tuve possessed a different kind of vision, one that saw impossibility as a mere engineering challenge. He proposed a radical concept, a miniature, self-contained radio transceiver small enough to fit inside the nose of a 5-inch naval shell. The principle was elegant in theory. This tiny device would continuously broadcast a radio signal. As the shell hurtled toward its target, the radio waves would reflect off the aircraft's skin and return. Due to the Doppler effect, the same phenomenon that causes a siren's pitch to change as it passes, the frequency of the reflected signal would be slightly shifted. An electronic circuit inside the shell would be designed to listen for this specific shift. When the reflected signal reached a predetermined intensity and frequency shift, indicating the shell was within a lethal range of perhaps 30 feet, the circuit would close, sending an electrical current to a detonator and exploding the shell. It was a shell with its own brain, its own eyes, its own sense of timing. The gap between this elegant theory and practical execution, however, was a chasm of monumental technical obstacles. The project, designated Section T, under the NDRC with Tuve as its chairman, began in a laboratory with a handful of researchers facing a checklist of the impossible. Every component required a breakthrough. The device had to be housed in a cylindrical space, no larger than a pint milk bottle, roughly 8 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. The primary obstacle was the vacuum tube, the fundamental component of all electronics in 1940. Standard radio tubes were fragile glass envelopes several inches tall, with hair-thin filaments and delicately spaced electrodes. They were designed to sit stationary in a living room radio, not to endure the apocalyptic forces of a naval gun launch. A 5-inch shell experienced an acceleration of 20,000 times the force of gravity when fired. For a fraction of a second, a 1-ounce component would effectively weigh over 1,200 pounds. This force was sufficient to tear steel apart, let alone the gossamer internals of a vacuum tube. The quest for a ruggedized tube became a national priority. Urgent requests went out from the NDRC to industrial giants like Western Electric, RCA, and Sylvania. The challenge was not merely to make tubes smaller, but to reimagine their very construction. Engineers experimented with new glass formulations, adding boron for strength. Internal electrodes were redesigned from hanging wires to sturdy planar structures that could better distribute stress. Filaments were spot welded, not simply suspended. After thousands of design iterations and catastrophic failures in test cannons, a miracle emerged from the production lines by the spring of 1941, a sub-miniature tube less than an inch tall, capable of surviving a 20,000 G launch. The power source presented another seemingly insurmountable hurdle. A conventional battery would be crushed or would leak. The brilliant solution came from Harry Diamond and Wilbur Hinman at the National Bureau of Standards. They invented a reserve battery that was inert until the moment of firing. It consisted of a glass ampule filled with electrolyte, housed in a cylinder with metal plates at the ends. When the shell was at rest, the liquid was isolated in the center. But when the gun fired, the immense centrifugal force generated by the shell's spin hurled the electrolyte outward, forcing it against the metal plates and initiating a chemical reaction that generated the necessary electrical current. This was not just a power source, it was a built-in safety mechanism, ensuring the fuse was completely inert until it was spinning at high speed, safely downrange. By May 1941, a prototype fuse, built by the Bureau of Standards team, was tested in an air-dropped bomb over water. The concept was proven when the bomb detonated precisely at the correct altitude. But a bomb was gently released from a plane, experiencing a few hundred Gs of force. The artillery shell remained the ultimate test. Following Pearl Harbor, the project was escalated to the highest priority. To centralize the sprawling effort, the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, was founded on March 10, 1942, becoming the nerve center for the fuse's development. The challenges cascaded. A ring antenna had to be designed to fit the shell's circumference. Transmitter circuits had to be built with only 3 tubes, receiver amplifiers with 4, all drawing minimal power from the spin-activated battery. The Doppler detection circuit had to be exquisitely sensitive, able to distinguish the faint, shifted signal from the background noise of its own transmission. Secrecy was absolute. The project was deceptively christened the Variable Time, or VT fuse, suggesting it was merely a more advanced clockwork timer. Workers in factories across the country, from Crossley to RCA to General Electric, manufactured individual components without any knowledge of the final, terrifyingly clever weapon they were building. They were assembling the pieces of a puzzle whose final image was known only to a select few, a secret that would remain hidden from the enemy for the entirety of the war, protected not just by security, but by the sheer audacity of its own impossibility. The crucible of combat. Proving grounds from the Solomons to the English Channel. The theoretical became reality on August 12, 1942, in the calm waters of Chesapeake Bay. The cruiser USS Cleveland faced off against 3 radio-controlled target drones in the first comprehensive test of the production line proximity fuse. The results were so stunning they seemed to defy physics. The Cleveland's 5-inch guns destroyed all 3 drones in a matter of minutes, using fewer than 10 rounds total. Naval authorities, expecting a 2-day test schedule, cancelled the remainder immediately. The data was incontrovertible. Where 2,500 time-fused shells had been needed for a single kill, the proximity fuse achieved it with a handful. The improvement in effectiveness was not marginal, it was revolutionary, a 25-fold increase that transformed naval anti-aircraft doctrine overnight. The first combat-ready fuses were distributed to the fleet in October 1942 under the strictest secrecy. The cruiser USS Helena was among the first recipients, issued 500 rounds of the enchanted ammunition with stern orders. Use only over water, where duds would sink forever and never reveal their existence. The gunners were trained in their handling, but kept in the dark about their true nature, told only that they were a new type of variable time fuse. On the morning of January 5, 1943, in the cooler Gulf off Guadalcanal, theory met its ultimate test. As 4 Japanese Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers completed an attack on the Allied task force, Lieutenant Red Cochrane gripped the fire control director aboard the Helena. The Vals, having struck the New Zealand cruiser Achilles, were executing their characteristic precise turn to escape. Cochrane gave the order. 2 salvos thundered from the Helena's aft 5-inch battery. One of the departing aircraft, flying at a distance that would have been safe from any other shell, simply erupted into a fireball. It had not been touched by the shell itself. It had been eviscerated by shrapnel from a munition that detonated precisely 30 feet away, its miniature electronic brain having sensed the target and judged the moment of its own death to be optimal. The kill was instantaneous, clean, and utterly baffling to the Japanese. The era of the smart projectile had begun. Word of the magic fuse spread through the fleet with the speed of a victorious battle report. Ships equipped with the VT fuse began reporting kill ratios that dwarfed previous statistics. By March 1943, proximity fuses, constituting only 25% of the anti-aircraft ammunition in the Pacific, were accounting for over 50% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire. The effect was not just material, but profoundly psychological. Japanese pilots, accustomed to weaving through predictable flak bursts, now found the sky itself seemed to seek them out. They were forced to adapt in ways that crippled their effectiveness, attacking from higher altitudes, reducing bombing accuracy, skimming the wave tops to confuse the fuse's radar with sea surface reflections, making them vulnerable to other defenses, and diving more steeply to minimize exposure time. The fuse's second great theater of war was the defense of London. In June 1944, Germany unleashed its V-1 buzz bomb campaign, sending hundreds of pilotless, jet-powered cruise missiles against the city. Defending against these small, fast, low-flying targets was a nightmare for traditional artillery. Winston Churchill, facing a civilian morale crisis, personally authorized the use of the VT fuse over land, despite the grave risk of a dud being recovered by German intelligence. The decision was vindicated spectacularly. American 90mm and British 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns, now firing proximity-fused shells, saw their kill rates against the V-1 skyrocket from a paltry 10% to an astounding 79%. On one particularly effective day, 68 of 104 incoming V-1s were destroyed by the VT-fused guns before reaching London. The technology, born for naval warfare in the Pacific, had saved a European capital, proving its versatility and war-altering potential. The secret remained safe. German technicians who recovered duds assumed they were advanced time fuses, the miniaturized electronics inside so advanced as to be literally incomprehensible to them. The fracturing of doctrine, from kamikaze swarms to the Battle of the Bulge. The revolutionary success of the proximity fuse inevitably forced a desperate enemy to evolve its tactics, leading to one of the most brutal and psychologically taxing chapters of the Pacific War, the organized kamikaze campaign. By late 1944, Japanese naval aviation had been gutted. Its seasoned pilots were dead, its aircraft carriers sunk, and its replacement aviators received only rudimentary training. Conventional bombing and torpedo attacks had become suicidal in the face of American combat air patrols and the ever more lethal curtain of VT-fused flak. In response, Japan weaponized its own desperation, formalizing the special attack units, the kamikaze. This was a tactical evolution born directly from the inability to penetrate American defenses through conventional means. It was a stark admission that the proximity fuse had rendered their previous doctrine obsolete. The kamikaze presented a unique and horrifying challenge to the VT fuse's logic. The fuse was designed to destroy an aircraft, and it did so with phenomenal efficiency. But a conventional attacker, once damaged, would typically break off. A kamikaze, its pilot intent on martyrdom, could often remain on its deadly trajectory even when critically damaged, a burning, uncontrollable projectile that could still crash into a ship. The calculus shifted from simply hitting the plane to utterly annihilating it. The American response was a terrifying concentration of firepower. Ships, particularly the vulnerable radar picket destroyers stationed on the perimeter of the fleet, began throwing up unprecedented volumes of fire. They created dense, overlapping kill zones of proximity-fused shells, engaging targets at the limits of their radar range. The goal was no longer to damage, but to vaporize. The ferocity of this defense was exemplified on May 11, 1945, off Okinawa. The destroyer USS Hadley and the destroyer minelayer USS Evans, operating on the perilous radar picket line, faced a swarm of 156 attacking aircraft in a 90-minute nightmare. In a display of heroic gunnery, the two ships, weaving and firing constantly, destroyed 35 enemy planes between them. The Hadley alone accounted for 12 before being struck and disabled by 4 kamikazes that managed to survive the storm of steel and flame. The Evans was hit by 4 and damaged by several near misses, yet her crew fought on. Post-battle analysis concluded that without the VT fuse, which could kill aircraft at ranges where time fuses were useless, both ships would have been sent to the bottom within the first half hour. The fuse was not a perfect shield against the suicide attacker, but it was the critical factor that made such last stands survivable. Statistical analysis showed that for every 278 Japanese aircraft destroyed by VT-fused ammunition in this late war period, only 46 would have been killed by time fuses, a 6-to-1 ratio that translated directly into thousands of American sailors' lives, saved, and dozens of ships preserved for the final assault on Japan. Simultaneously, in the frozen forests of the European theater, the VT fuse was authoring a different kind of revolution. For years, its use had been strictly forbidden over land, lest a dud fall into German hands. This restriction was catastrophically lifted during the Battle of the Bulge. As German forces surged through the Ardennes in December 1944, they caught the Allies in bad weather that neutralized their air superiority. American infantry and artillery units were pushed to the brink. Facing overwhelming German assaults, frontline artillery commanders like Colonel George Axelson made the unauthorized, battle-driven decision to use their stockpiled anti-aircraft shells with VT fuses in a ground-burst role. The effect on the German infantry was nothing short of apocalyptic. A traditional artillery shell buried itself in the snow and mud before exploding, directing most of its energy upward and limiting its shrapnel pattern. A VT-fused shell, set to detonate 20 to 50 feet above the ground, unleashed a blizzard of steel fragments downward. Each shell created a lethal footprint covering over 3,000 square feet, compared to a mere 60 square feet for a conventional ground burst. There was no foxhole deep enough, no forest cover thick enough to provide protection from this airburst hellstorm. General George Patton, whose Third Army spearheaded the relief of Bastogne, became the fuse's most vocal advocate. He documented a single, devastating battalion-sized concentration of proximity-fused fire that caught a German battalion crossing the Sauer River, killing 702 soldiers by actual body count. Patton wrote to the War Department, "The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. I think that when all armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare." From the snows of the Ardennes to the crossing of the Rhine, the VT fuse broke the back of German infantry assaults, proving that a technology conceived to kill aircraft could be just as decisive in shredding an army on the ground. The unseen legacy, forging the American arsenal of democracy. The story of the proximity fuse culminates not merely in its battlefield triumphs, but in its profound and enduring legacy, which reshaped the very architecture of American power. By August 1945, the industrial and scientific effort behind the fuse had become a staggering national achievement. Over 22 million VT fuses had been produced, their cost plummeting from a prohibitive $732 per unit in 1942 to a manageable $18 by war's end, a testament to the relentless efficiency of the American production line. This output required an unprecedented mobilization of industry. 87 firms, operating across 110 factories, formed a vast, synchronized network. Giants like Crosley, RCA, and General Electric served as final assembly contractors, coordinating a supply chain of over 2,000 subcontractors who manufactured the 130 miniaturized components that went into each fuse. At its peak, this ecosystem produced 70,000 complete fuses per day, a river of electronic ingenuity flowing directly to the front lines. The strategic impact was recognized at the highest levels. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal stated that the fuse helped blaze the trail to Japan, acknowledging that without the protection it afforded the fleet, the westward advance could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater. Admiral Arleigh Burke, a master of naval combat, noted that by 1945 all 5-inch ammunition was VT fused, and these shells were knocking down enemy planes by the dozens. The fuse had fundamentally altered the tactical balance, making sustained Japanese aerial offensives unsustainable and saving countless lives. Yet its greatest legacy was not in the ships it saved or the planes it destroyed, but in the new paradigm of warfare and innovation it established. The program proved that complex electronic systems could be hardened to survive incredible stresses, a foundational principle for the subsequent development of guided missiles, supersonic aircraft avionics, and the entire space program. The miniature vacuum tubes, once deemed impossible, became the direct ancestors of the transistors and integrated circuits that would power the modern world. The organizational model pioneered by Dr. Tuve and Section T, a close partnership between university scientists, Johns Hopkins APL, industrial might, and military oversight, became the blueprint for the Cold War. The Manhattan Project, the Polaris missile program, and NASA itself all followed this arsenal of democracy template, where theoretical science was rapidly translated into world-altering technology through centralized, well-funded national efforts. The ultimate testament to the fuse's success was the enemy's enduring ignorance. Post-war interrogations revealed that Japanese and German intelligence never fully comprehended what they were facing. They attributed the sudden, lethal accuracy of American anti-aircraft fire to superior radar or better fire control computers. The idea that every shell contained a miniature radar set was, to them, a scientific fantasy, an impossibility that their own engineers had dismissed. This failure of imagination was the fuse's final victory. It remained a secret not just because of security, but because it was, quite literally, unbelievable. Dr. Merle Tuve, returning to his academic life, rarely spoke of his pivotal role, deflecting credit to the thousands of engineers and factory workers whose collective genius had made the impossible routine. His modesty underscored a profound truth. The proximity fuse was more than a weapon. It was a demonstration of what a free society, when galvanized by a just cause, could achieve. It married scientific curiosity with industrial scale and strategic necessity, proving that no technical challenge was insurmountable. From Lieutenant Cochrane's first electrifying kill off Guadalcanal to the airbursts that saved London and shattered German divisions, the VT fuse announced a new age. It was the dawn of the intelligent munition, a testament to the power of an idea that the burden of precision could be transferred from the human to the machine, forever changing the calculus of war and securing its place alongside radar and the atomic bomb as one of the few technologies that truly shaped the destiny of a world at war.